noticed was the cashier's hand on my wrist. Not rough or rude, just firm enough to stop me as I reached for the small sheet cake I had saved for. He leaned over the scratched counter and lowered his voice until it was almost a breath. "Are you Margaret Lawson? Are you Ethan's mother?" I nodded, because my voice had slipped somewhere behind my ribs. He gave me a quiet warning about my daughter-in-law's family, about how they spent freely, while calling my son for help every month. His eyes held the kind of worry you only see on people who have watched something wrong for too long. Then he let go, and kept scanning as if nothing at all had happened. I pushed through the side door into cold Ohio wind and tried to breathe. The parking lot hummed with afternoon noise, carts, rattling engines, idling a child crying after a balloon slipped into the sky. I should have gone straight to my son's car where he was waiting, but curiosity pressed on my chest like a weight. I circled the loading dock and slipped behind 2 green dumpsters that smelled like old oranges and bleach. From there I could watch the front without being seen, and decide whether the warning was kindness or gossip. 2 minutes later, I saw Martin. Hale, my daughter-in-law Clara's father, pushed through the automatic doors with 3 glossy black bags that glinted like wet stone. Gold letters on the sides caught the light. They were not grocery bags. They were designer. He moved easily, not like a man buried under overdue notices, and clicked a key fob until a new pale SUV chirped and flashed. He stacked the bags in the trunk with the care people use for glass, then took a phone call with the relaxed smile of someone who believes everything will work out in his favor. "I am 68, a retired nurse from a small clinic in Columbus, and I have counted pennies all my life to make sure my boy had what he needed. Ethan married Clara 3 years ago." I told myself she was simply reserved the way some people are when they step into a new family. Her father was always polite. Her mother always asked about my health. Yet requests kept arriving at my son's door. There were stories about rent medicine and car repairs, small fires that needed cash fast. Ethan hates to see anyone struggle. So do I. Now the cashier's whisper circled my head and refused to unclench. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was jealousy. Or maybe I had trained myself for decades to ignore alarms because peace felt safer than questions. I stayed there until my legs cramped, watching and listening, promising I would not accuse anyone until I saw enough truth. Like a pulse under a blanket was beating somewhere close. All I had to do was find it. On the ride over, Ethan asked if the cake had been heavy to carry. I forced a smile and said it was fine, but my mind kept circling back to the cashier's whisper and the sight of Martin's gleaming SUV. My son drove us toward Clara's neighborhood, humming, faintly unaware that his wife's family had just been painted in a very different light. I kept glancing at him, wondering how many hours of overtime he had worked this month to cover another one of their emergencies. As the houses slipped past the window, I thought of all the little moments I had brushed aside. There was the afternoon. Clara called me in tears, saying her father's medication cost too much. I had pulled $60 from my grocery envelope and dropped it in their mailbox that night. The next morning, while waiting for the bus, I saw Martin drive past in a crisp suit and polished shoes that looked nothing like the image of a man weighed down by illness. I had told myself maybe it was borrowed or a gift. I did not want to think badly of family. Another time, Clara stopped by my apartment and casually mentioned a dinner she and Ethan had attended at a steakhouse in downtown Columbus, the kind where one plate costs more than my entire week of groceries. When I asked if it was for a birthday or a work event, she shrugged and said friends had invited them and insisted on paying. Later, scrolling through photos on my phone, I stumbled on her social media post from the same evening. She had written, "Treating Dad the way he deserves," with a photo of Martin holding up a glass of wine. My heart had pinched at the sight, but I told myself it must have been an old picture now crouched behind dumpsters replaying the cashier's words. Those small contradictions stacked up like bricks in a wall. How many times had I ignored the details because I wanted harmony for my son's marriage? The new curtains in their living room, the watch on Martin's wrist, the string of pearl earrings Clara claimed were fake. Each memory returned with sharp edges I could no longer smooth away. Martin finished his call, slipped the phone into his jacket, and walked back toward the store as if nothing unusual had happened. But the sight of those glossy bags disappearing into the trunk of that SUV was burned into me. The cashier had been right about at least one thing. Something about this family story did not add up, and if I wanted to protect Ethan, I would have to keep watching no matter how much it hurt to discover the truth. The following Saturday, I told Ethan I wanted to visit the farmer's market on High Street. He offered to drive me, but I insisted I would take the bus. What I really wanted was space to follow my own plan. The image of Martin slipping into that shiny SUV had rooted itself deep in my mind. I needed more than one glimpse, more than one whispered warning. I needed to see for myself the rhythm of his life when he thought no one was watching. From the market, I walked 3 blocks to a small cafe with wide windows and a clear view of the road. I ordered black coffee and waited. At noon, Sharp Martin's SUV rolled past. He did not turn toward the hardware store he claimed to be working at part-time. Instead, he pulled into the lot of the Dublin Country Club, a place so exclusive I had only ever seen it in magazine articles at the dentist office. The guard at the gate waved him through without hesitation. My chest. He tightened. People drowning in debt do not stroll into country clubs in tailored jackets. I lingered until he drove away 2 hours later, looking satisfied, his posture straight, his face glowing the way people look after closing a deal. He had no grocery bags this time, just a leather briefcase when he passed me on the street corner. I ducked behind a bus shelter, heart pounding. He was humming as if the world itself had no weight for him at all. That evening, as I walked home, the October air sharp in my lungs, I overheard 2 women outside a boutique on 3rd Avenue. One, a gray-haired woman in a bright red scarf, said, "Did you see Claire last week at the mall? That emerald dress she wore must have cost at least $200. The other adjusted her glasses and replied, "And she bought those French beauty creams too. My granddaughter works there and says Clara is one of their best customers." I slowed my pace, ears straining. These were not women gossiping idly. Their voices carried the irritation of neighbors who had seen too much. I hurried the last few blocks to my apartment, my pulse fast. The picture was getting clearer. Clara's family begged Ethan for rent money, claimed unpaid bills and overdue medicine, but still they glided through boutiques, salons, and country clubs like royalty in disguise. My son's overtime hours, his exhaustion, the gray shadows under his eyes. He was paying for their theater. I pressed my hand against the cool metal railing outside my building and made a silent vow. I would no longer silence my instincts. Whatever truth was hiding in plain sight, I was going to pull it into the light, no matter how much it hurt. Would you like me to move straight into part 4? The family visit. 480 words, where Margaret finally steps into Clara's parents' home and sees the contradictions up close. The invitation came 2 weeks later. Clara called Ethan on a Thursday evening, her voice sugary over speakerphone. She said her parents wanted us over for Sunday lunch. Nothing fancy, just a family meal. Ethan lit up like a boy ass to his first dance. I forced a smile, though my stomach nodded. I had been gathering suspicions like dry twigs, and I knew this visit might be the spark that set them ablaze. On Sunday, Ethan drove us out of Columbus to a quiet neighborhood in Dublin. The lawns were manicured, leaves rad into perfect piles. Porches swept clean. Hardly the setting of people who struggled to pay bills. Clara greeted us at the door in a silk blouse the color of autumn leaves. She hugged me warmly, and the faint trace of expensive perfume clung to my coat. I had seen that bottle once in a store window. Its price was nearly half my grocery budget for the month. Inside the house gleamed as though it had been staged for a magazine. The living room walls had fresh paint. The floors shone, and a brand new leather sofa sat where the old fabric one used to be. Crystal vases dotted the tables filled with roses that looked too perfect to be store-bought. A massive flat-screen television dominated one wall, the kind I had only ever seen in appliance showrooms. I forced my lips into a polite smile, but inside, every detail screamed contradiction. "Mom, doesn't it look wonderful?" Ethan whispered proudly, as if Clara's family's prosperity reflected on him. I nodded, too weary to argue. At the dining table, Martin poured us wine from a dark bottle with a gold-foiled label. I recognized it instantly. Just last week I had seen the same bottle at a specialty store, $60 at least. A gift from a friend, Martin said when I asked. His smile was smooth, practiced. Clara's mother, Diane, carried in platters of roasted lamb, saffron rice, and imported cheeses all arranged like a feast from another world. We found some incredible discounts, she explained when I raised an eyebrow. Discounts again. Always discounts. As the meal stretched on, I kept my hands folded in my lap, studying every detail. Clara's earrings caught the light pearls, not fake like she had once claimed. Her nails were manicured in a style that cost more than my weekly prescriptions. The conversation danced lightly around Ethan's job, his long hours, and the little apartment he and Clara shared. Each time he mentioned working overtime, Clara's eyes flickered, and her parents exchanged a glance so quick most would have missed it. But I saw. I always saw. Halfway through dessert, a neighbor dropped by with a bottle of champagne. He greeted Martin with the respect one shows to someone of influence, not desperation. My fork froze midway to my mouth. This was no struggling family barely keeping the lights on. This was a family living well, living off the sweat of my son's back. When we left that afternoon, Ethan clasped my hand, beaming. "See, Mom, they're doing their best. Aren't they wonderful?" I squeezed his fingers and forced a smile. But my chest ached. He could not see the truth yet, but I could. And I knew the day was coming when his illusions would shatter. 3 nights after that Sunday lunch, I sat at my kitchen table counting out coins for my prescriptions when my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. I hesitated, then opened the message. It was a photo of a grocery receipt dated just 2 days earlier. The total read $572.86. The list included imported seafood French cheeses and 2 bottles of champagne at $90 each. At the bottom, the name printed clearly, Martin Hale beneath the image. The sender had typed, "Mrs. Tend Lawson." I thought you should see this. My throat went dry. I recognized the number. It belonged to the cashier who had warned me. I stared at the glowing screen, my heart thudding. This was no rumor. This was proof, black and white, undeniable. The same Martin who had smiled at me over roasted lamb and stories of hardship was buying champagne like water. The next day, another message came, a receipt for nearly $600, dated the same week. Clara had called Ethan sobbing about overdue rent. My stomach clenched. Each line item felt like a betrayal. Caviar, truffles, imported wine. I pressed the phone against my chest and closed my eyes. My son had worked double shifts that week. He had skipped dinners with friends, had come home with circles under his eyes, while Clara's family filled their cabinets with luxury, as if fate wanted to seal the truth. That evening, my landline rang. The voice on the other end was a woman I barely knew, Mrs. Delaney, who lived down the block from Clara's parents. She said she had gotten my number from a mutual acquaintance. Her voice shook with anger. "Mrs. Lawson, you deserve to know. Last weekend they threw a birthday party for Martin catered. Hundreds of guests. They had professional chefs, imported wines, even an ice sculpture. People were whispering, it must have cost thousands. Yet your son told my daughter they were struggling with hospital bills." I listened, hardly able to breathe. Each word landed like a hammer on glass. The illusion I had tried to keep for Ethan shattered piece by piece. They weren't merely stretching the truth. They had built an entire theater of lies scripted down to the last excuse. That night, Ethan stopped by after work. He looked exhausted, shoulders heavy from the long hours. He told me Clara had mentioned another emergency, this time car repairs for her father. He sighed, saying he might need to dip into his savings. I reached across the table and held his hand. I wanted to blurt it all out to show him the receipts glowing on my phone, but I stopped. His eyes were kind but tired, not ready for war. I knew then what had to happen. I needed more. Enough that even Ethan, blinded by love and loyalty, could not deny it. Proof so heavy that lies would collapse beneath its weight. The following Wednesday, Ethan arrived at my apartment after work. He looked worn, his tie crooked, his face pale from long hours. He sank into the chair across from me and rubbed his temples. "Clara just called," he muttered. "Her dad needs another procedure. Insurance won't cover it." They need 200 by Friday. I felt the air leave my chest. The words were nearly identical to what Clara had used the last time. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. "Ethan," I said softly, "I need to show you something." He looked up, puzzled. I opened the photos the cashier had sent me. One by one, I placed the screen before him. The receipts glowed in the dim light of my kitchen. 400, 600 champagne, caviar, designer, groceries. Each dated the same days his wife had claimed her family was desperate. At first he frowned. "Mom, these could be anyone's." "Look closer," I whispered. His eyes slid to the name printed at the bottom, Martin Hale. His jaw tightened. He scrolled through the next, then the next. His voice cracked. "Where did you get these?" I told him about the cashier, about overhearing neighbors at the boutique about the party. Mrs. Delaney described. Every word was slow, careful, like stepping across thin ice. Ethan's shoulders stiffened. "You mean to say Clara's family? What lied for 2 years?" His voice was a blend of disbelief and anger. I didn't answer. I just let the evidence speak. He stood pacing the small room, running both hands through his hair. "No, there has to be another explanation. Maybe Dad had a good month. Maybe they borrowed." Maybe his voice trailed off, unconvincing even to himself. I wanted to reach for him, but I knew he needed space to let the realization bloom. "Son," I said gently, "I know you love Clara, but love should not demand blindness. Look at the dates. Look at the amounts. While you worked overtime, they feasted." His chest rose and fell rapidly. Finally, he stopped pacing, his eyes wet. "I need to know for sure. I can't keep living in this fog." That night after he left my apartment, Ethan went home and did something he had never done before. He searched through Clara's things. In the back of their closet, he found glossy shopping bags from boutiques in downtown Columbus. Inside were clothes still with price tags, jewelry tucked into velvet boxes, and then the ledger spiral-bound, filled with Clara's neat handwriting. Page after page recorded every fabricated emergency rent medicine car repairs. Next to each line was the amount Ethan had sent. At the bottom of the last page was a new entry in bold. Mom dental surgery. Next month, $1, $800. A note followed in the margin. If he resists, remind him how much he owes us. When Ethan called me later that night, his voice was hollow. "Mom," he whispered, "it's worse than we thought. They kept records like it was a business." The next evening, Ethan asked Clara to sit with him in the living room. His voice was calm, but his hands trembled. He laid the ledger on the coffee table, the receipts I had given him stacked neatly beside it. Clara's eyes flickered the moment she saw them. For a heartbeat, she froze, then forced a laugh. "Where did you find that old notebook? Those are just household notes." Ethan opened to a page labeled "Car Repairs, $650. "This date," he said quietly. "You told me your father's transmission broke. You cried on the phone until I wired the money. On this same day, you spent nearly $700 on clothes. And here hospital bills $300 the very day Dad bought champagne." His voice shook, but his gaze never left hers. Clara's mask cracked. She leaned forward, her tone sharp. "You had no right to go through my things, and you had no right to turn my life into an ATM. Ethan snapped. The words hung heavy in the room. Martin arrived minutes later, called in by Clara's urgent text. He walked in wearing a pressed shirt and that same confident smile. But when he saw the ledger, the receipts, and Ethan's pale face, his expression faltered. "Son, whatever this looks like, I can explain." "Then explain," Ethan demanded. "Explain why every emergency lined up perfectly with shopping trips and parties. Explain why I have given over $15,000 in 2 years, while your house keeps getting shinier." For a long moment, Martin said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he lowered himself into a chair. His tone changed. Colder, now almost businesslike. "Because you made it easy. You wanted to be the hero, and we needed help. It was never personal, just practical." Clara's head whipped toward him. "Dad, stop." But Ethan had heard enough. Not personal, he repeated, his voice breaking. I gave up. Nights of sleep, worked overtime, skipped vacations because I thought you were drowning. I thought I was saving my family. Clara's veneer finally shattered. Fine. She spat tears streaking her mascara. Yes, we lied. We knew you'd always say yes. My father told me from the start you were perfect because you can't say no. You believed every word and we lived better for it. Why should I apologize for being smarter than you? Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. The woman he had married, the family he had trusted, had never seen him as a partner or a son-in-law, only as a vein to tap. Again and again, until nothing was left. He stood, his voice firm, though his heart was breaking. This marriage is over. I will not live as your victim one more day. That night, Ethan packed a single duffel bag and left his apartment. Clara followed him to the door. Her sobs loud enough to rattle the neighbor's walls, but her words were poisoned with fury. You will regret this, Ethan. You'll never find someone who gives you what I do. He paused only long enough to answer. I already regret ever believing you. Then he walked out into the cold Ohio night, the ledger still under his arm, like a piece of evidence too heavy to drop. The days that followed blurred into court filings, consultations with lawyers and long silences where Ethan tried to piece together the ruins of his trust. Clara fought back at first, insisting the receipts were forged. The ledger misunderstood, but Martin's careless admission and the photographs I held made her defense crumble. By the time the divorce proceedings began, their tactics had shifted from denial to desperation. They begged, they bargained, they promised to return every cent. Ethan never looked back. When the lawyers tallied everything, the total siphoned from him reached just over $20,000. That number felt like a blade twisting in his chest. It represented months of lost sleep, years of overtime, and countless sacrifices he could never reclaim. Yet as painful as the sum was, the real wound was knowing his kindness had been calculated against him, transformed into someone else's luxury. Clara tried one last act. She arrived at my apartment unannounced one afternoon, wearing plain clothes and no makeup, her voice trembling as she pleaded, Adeline, please talk to Ethan. Tell him not to hate me. I was desperate. I met her gaze calm and steady. Desperation does not throw champagne parties. Clara Desperation does not wear silk and pearls while begging for rent money. You were not desperate. You were entitled. She left with no more tears, only a cold glare that told me the mask had finally slipped. Ethan moved into a small apartment near his job. The walls were bare, the furniture simple, but there was a strange relief in the emptiness. No more lies waiting at the door, no more crises manufactured out of thin air. He came to me often for dinner, and though his eyes carried shadows, I could see light returning. Months later, the divorce was finalized. Clara vanished from Columbus with her parents. Their departure hushed and hurried. Neighbors whispered about debt collectors and unpaid vendors, but I no longer cared. What mattered was that Ethan was free. One evening, as we shared stew at my kitchen table, he took my hand and said, Mom, I should feel broken, but I feel lighter. They stole my money, but you saved my life. His words filled me with both sorrow and pride. He had been burned, but he was stronger for surviving. The story did not end with the loss. It ended with the beginning. My son stepping forward, scarred but unshackled, ready to rebuild a life no one could counterfeit again. When I look back on everything, I realized the greatest pain was not the money lost, but the trust betrayed. My son believed he was helping family, but in truth he was being used. And I, as his mother, had to find the courage to show him what he could not yet see. It taught me that generosity without wisdom becomes a doorway for manipulation. Love should never demand blindness, and true family never hides behind lies. By speaking up, I may have broken his heart, but I also saved him from years more of deception. Now he walks with clearer eyes, and I feel proud knowing we faced the truth together. What about you? What lesson do you take from this story? And which city are you watching from right now? Share your thoughts